The contract was signed. The bride was wrong. And Adrian Blackthorne, Duke of Ashford, conqueror of failing estates, breaker of soft men, stood in a London drawing room staring at the woman who would either ruin him or remake him. She wasn't supposed to be here. The younger sister was. But Eleanor Voss met his eyes without flinching, her father's betrayal hanging in the air like gunpowder, and Adrian had 1 second to decide. Walk away and let scandal devour them both, or swallow his pride and marry a woman he'd never wanted. He chose the latter. That choice would cost him everything he thought he understood about power. If you want to see how far this story can go, how a ruthless duke and an unwanted bride turned deception into dominance, stay until the end. Drop a like and comment with the city you're watching from. Let's see how far this reaches. The rain came down like judgment. It hammered the cobblestones outside the Voss family townhouse, turning the street into a churning river of filth and horse muck. Inside, the drawing room was all velvet and lies. Candles flickered against dark wood paneling. The fire hissed in the grate. And Adrian Blackthorne stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the storm and wishing he were anywhere else. He didn't belong in London. Never had. The city was a theater of parasites, men in tailcoats who smiled with their mouths and schemed with their eyes, women who spoke in coded insults over tea, everyone circling each other like sharks in silk. Adrian had built his fortune out west, in the raw territories where a man's word was his bond and a handshake meant more than a 100-page contract. He'd turned failing mines into profit, rebuilt collapsed rail lines, and crushed every competitor who thought they could outwork him. He didn't do politics. He did results. But results didn't buy legitimacy. Not in England. Not among the old families who still controlled Parliament, the courts, the trade routes. His wealth was new, his title barely a decade old, and the whispers followed him everywhere. Frontier brute, American mongrel, duke in name only. So when his solicitor suggested a marriage alliance with the Voss family, old money, impeccable lineage, political connections that stretched back to the Tudors, Adrian had agreed. Not because he wanted a wife, but because he needed armor. The deal was simple. He would marry Lillian Voss, the younger daughter, 18, accomplished, beautiful by all accounts. In exchange, her father, Lord Gerald Voss, would secure Adrian's position in certain parliamentary circles, smooth over the resistance to his expansion into shipping and steel. Clean, efficient, transactional. Except nothing about tonight felt clean. Adrian glanced at the clock. 8:15. The ceremony was supposed to begin at 8. He'd arrived on time, as agreed. But Lillian hadn't appeared. Neither had her father. Only the butler, pale and sweating, who'd mumbled something about a delay and "please wait your grace" before vanishing into the back rooms. Adrian's jaw tightened. He didn't wait well. Behind him, the door opened. He turned, expecting Lillian. Instead, a woman stepped into the room. Tall, dark-haired, wearing a gown that had seen better seasons. Her face was angular, sharp-boned, not softened by powder or rouge. Her eyes were gray, the color of river stones, and they swept over him once, quickly, before settling somewhere near his left shoulder. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was low, controlled. "I'm Eleanor Voss." Adrian frowned. "I'm here for Lillian." "I know." She didn't move. Didn't elaborate, just stood there 3 feet inside the room, hands folded at her waist like she was waiting for him to catch up to something she already understood. He didn't like it. "Where is she?" "Indisposed." That's not an answer. Eleanor's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "No, it isn't." The door opened again, wider this time, and Lord Gerald Voss swept in like a man who owned the air. He was shorter than Adrian, thick around the middle, with the florid face of someone who drank too much and smiled too easily. His eyes were quick, calculating. He clapped his hands together as if this were a garden party. "Your Grace, my apologies for the delay. These things, you understand? Family matters. Delicate. Where's Lillian?" Adrian's voice cut through the pleasantries like a blade. Gerald hesitated, just for a second. But Adrian caught it. "Ah, yes, about that." Gerald glanced at Eleanor, then back at Adrian, and his smile stretched a little too wide. "There's been a slight adjustment to our arrangement." Adrian went very still. Adjustment. Lillian has taken ill, quite suddenly. Nerves, perhaps. The physician advised, get her. I'm afraid that's not possible. Then we're done here. Adrian turned toward the door. Wait. Gerald's voice sharpened. You misunderstand. The marriage can still proceed. Eleanor will stand in her place. Adrian stopped, turned, stared at the older man like he'd just spoken in tongues. You're joking. I assure you I am not. Gerald gestured toward Eleanor, who hadn't moved, hadn't reacted at all. She is my eldest daughter. Same lineage, same family connections. The contract specified a Voss daughter. It did not specify which one. Adrian's hands curled into fists. The agreement was for Lillian. The spirit of the agreement was an alliance between our families. That remains intact. You lied. I adapted. Gerald's smile didn't waver. Surely a man of your business acumen can appreciate flexibility. For a long moment, Adrian didn't speak. He looked at Gerald, then at Eleanor. She met his gaze this time, and there was something in her eyes. Not apology, not defiance. Something colder. Resignation, maybe. Or contempt. He couldn't tell. Why? Adrian asked, still looking at her. Eleanor blinked. Why what? Why you? She didn't answer right away. Gerald started to speak, but she cut him off with a small shake of her head. Because Lillian is valuable, Eleanor said quietly. And I am not. The words landed like stones. Gerald laughed, too loud. Eleanor has a flair for the dramatic. What she means is, I mean exactly what I said. Eleanor's voice didn't rise, but it sliced through her father's bluster. Lillian is young, beautiful, malleable. She can be married higher, later, when the price is better. I am 26, unmarried, and past the point of strategic use, except for this. Adrian stared at her, at the straight line of her spine. The way she said it, flat, factual, like she was reading a ledger. Gerald cleared his throat. Your Grace, I understand this is unexpected, but the terms remain favorable. The alliance stands, and Eleanor is perfectly capable of fulfilling the role of Duchess. She's been managing this household for years. She's educated, well-mannered. She's a replacement, Adrian said. She's a solution. Gerald's smile hardened. And unless you want to walk out of here tonight and face every gossip rag in London speculating about why the great Duke of Ashford was jilted at the altar, I suggest you consider it. The threat was implicit. Scandal, humiliation, weakness. Everything Adrian had spent years trying to avoid. He could walk away. Right now. Let Gerald spin whatever story he wanted. But the damage would spread. His rivals would seize on it. The parliamentary votes he needed would evaporate. Every negotiation, every contract, every alliance would be tainted by the whisper, the frontier duke couldn't even secure a wife. Or he could stay. Marry the woman standing in front of him, a stranger he hadn't chosen, and salvage the appearance of control. Both options were traps. Adrian turned back to Eleanor. Do you want this? She didn't flinch. Does it matter? Answer the question. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, just slightly. No, I don't want this, but I'll do it. Why? Because refusal isn't an option. She glanced at her father, and something flickered in her expression, sharp, brief, gone, before Adrian could name it. And because you're the better alternative. Better than what? Than whoever he sells me to next. Gerald's face flushed. Eleanor, stop. Adrian's voice was quiet, but it cut like a whip. Gerald shut his mouth. Adrian looked at Eleanor again, studied her. She didn't squirm under his gaze, didn't look away, just stood there, worn gown and all, like she'd already decided she was going to survive this, whether he agreed or not. He'd built his fortune on reading people, knowing when to push, when to walk, when to call a bluff. Gerald was a snake. That much was obvious. But Eleanor, she wasn't a victim. Not entirely. She was cornered, yes, trapped. But she wasn't broken, and she wasn't pretending. Adrian exhaled through his nose, calculated, weighed. Then he looked at Gerald. The original terms, Adrian said. Every clause. Every clause. No renegotiation. Gerald's smile returned. Of course, Your Grace. Exactly as written. And one more thing. Adrian stepped closer, close enough that Gerald had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. If I find out you lied about anything else, if there's another surprise, another adjustment, I will bury you. Financially, socially, every way that matters. Do you understand? Gerald's smile thinned. Perfectly. Adrian nodded once, then he turned to Eleanor. Get ready. We're doing this now. Eleanor blinked. Now? I'm not giving your father time to change his mind again. Adrian glanced at Gerald. Call the officiant. The ceremony took 11 minutes. An Anglican minister, dragged from his supper, still wearing gravy on his collar, stood in the Voss family chapel and rattled through the vows like he was reading a shipping manifest. Eleanor repeated the words in a voice that didn't shake. Adrian did the same. No flowers, no guests, just Gerald standing in the corner, watching like a man who'd just closed a profitable deal. When the minister said, "You may kiss the bride," Adrian didn't move. Eleanor didn't either. The minister coughed. Your Grace? We're done, Adrian said. He turned to Gerald. Send the contracts to my solicitor in the morning. Then he walked out. Eleanor stood there for a moment, alone in the chapel, the rain still hammering the windows. The minister shuffled his papers. Gerald approached, smiling again, hand outstretched like he expected thanks. Eleanor looked at him, at the man who'd sold her like livestock. Then she walked past him without a word and went upstairs to pack. The carriage ride to Adrian's London estate was silent. Eleanor sat on one side, Adrian on the other. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the wheels clattered over wet stone. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the window, watching the darkened street slide past. Adrian watched her. She didn't fidget, didn't cry, didn't ask questions. Just sat there, contained, like she'd learned a long time ago that showing emotion was a liability. You'll have your own rooms, Adrian said finally. Eleanor glanced at him. Thank you. This is a business arrangement. I don't expect personal entanglement. Understood. You'll attend social functions as required, represent the family name appropriately. Beyond that, your time is your own. Eleanor nodded, looked back at the window. Adrian frowned. Do you have anything to say? She tilted her head slightly. What would you like me to say? I don't know. Most women in your position would have opinions. Most women in my position, Eleanor said quietly, have the luxury of expectations. Adrian leaned back against the seat, studying her. You don't. No. Why not? Eleanor finally turned to look at him fully. Her gray eyes were steady, unreadable. Because I learned a long time ago, Your Grace, that expecting kindness from men like my father or you only leads to disappointment. So I stopped expecting. I started surviving. Adrian's jaw tightened. I'm not your father. No, Eleanor agreed. But you're not my ally either. You're a stranger who needed a duchess and got the wrong one. So let's not pretend this is anything other than what it is. A contract. You don't owe me kindness, and I don't owe you gratitude. She said it without heat, without bitterness. Just fact. Adrian didn't respond. What the hell was there to say? The carriage rolled to a stop in front of his townhouse. 4 stories, white stone, cold and immaculate. A footman opened the door. Eleanor stepped out without waiting for assistance. Inside, the housekeeper, a narrow-faced woman named Mrs. Hallowell, met them in the entry hall. She looked at Eleanor the way someone might look at a stray dog brought in from the rain. This is the Duchess, Adrian said flatly. Show her to the East Wing. Mrs. Hallowell's mouth thinned. The East Wing, Your Grace? Yes. That suite hasn't been opened in... Then open it. Adrian's tone left no room for argument. Mrs. Hallowell curtsied stiffly. Of course, Your Grace. She turned to Eleanor. "If you'll follow me, madam." Eleanor glanced at Adrian once more. He didn't look at her. Then she followed the housekeeper up the stairs and disappeared into the dark hallway. Adrian stood alone in the entry hall, rain still dripping from his coat, and realized he'd just tied himself to a woman he didn't know, didn't choose, and couldn't predict. He'd faced worse odds, but not by much. The east wing smelled like dust and old lavender. Eleanor followed Mrs. Hallowell down a corridor lined with closed doors and faded portraits. The housekeeper moved quickly, her keyring jangling, her mouth set in a line that made it clear she had opinions and no intention of sharing them. She stopped at a door near the end of the hall, unlocked it, and pushed it open. "Your rooms, madam." Eleanor stepped inside. The suite was large, sitting room, bedroom, dressing room visible through an open archway. The furniture was covered in sheets, the curtains were drawn, the air was stale. "I'll have the maids prepare it tomorrow," Mrs. Hallowell said. "For tonight, the bed is made. There are linens in the cupboard if you need extras." Eleanor turned to her. "Thank you." Mrs. Hallowell's expression didn't soften. "Will there be anything else?" "No." The housekeeper nodded once and left, closing the door behind her. Eleanor stood in the center of the room, alone, surrounded by shrouded furniture and silence. She walked to the window, pulled back the curtain. Rain streaked the glass. Beyond it, the city sprawled, thousands of windows, thousands of lives, none of them hers. She thought about Lillian, safe in her room, probably crying into her pillow, convinced she'd narrowly escaped disaster. She thought about her father, already calculating his next move, his next deal. She thought about Adrian, somewhere in this cold house, regretting the choice he'd made tonight. And she thought about herself, 26 years old, unmarried until tonight, used as a bargaining chip and tossed aside the moment something shinier came along, but still here, still breathing. Eleanor let the curtain fall. She turned away from the window, pulled the sheet off the nearest chair, and sat down. Tomorrow, she'd figure out how to survive this. Tonight, she'd already won. She was still standing, and that, Eleanor had learned, was the only victory that mattered. Morning came without mercy. Eleanor woke to pale light filtering through dusty curtains and the sound of footsteps in the hallway, sharp, efficient, belonging to people who had work to do and no patience for the new Duchess sleeping in the forgotten wing. She sat up, still wearing yesterday's dress, and realized she'd fallen asleep in the chair. Her neck ached. Her mouth tasted like copper. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and went to the window. Below, the street was already awake. Carriages rattled past. Servants hurried along the pavement with baskets and parcels. London moved like a machine, indifferent to the people it ground beneath its wheels. Eleanor turned away and found a wash basin in the corner, filled it from the pitcher, and scrubbed her face until her skin stung. Then she braided her hair, pinned it tight, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. No maid waiting with breakfast, no housekeeper hovering with instructions, just silence and the faint smell of beeswax. She made her way downstairs, following the sound of voices toward what she assumed was the dining room. The house was colder than the Voss townhouse, all hard edges and polished surfaces. No warmth, no softness, just order. She found Adrian in the breakfast room, sitting alone at a table long enough to seat 12. He was reading a newspaper, a cup of coffee at his elbow, still dressed in the same clothes from last night. He didn't look up when she entered. Eleanor stood in the doorway for a moment, waiting. Nothing. She cleared her throat. Adrian turned the page. "Am I allowed to eat?" Eleanor asked. He glanced up, eyes flat. "You're the Duchess. Do what you want." "I don't know what I'm allowed to want." Adrian folded the paper, set it aside. "There's food on the sideboard. Help yourself." Eleanor crossed to the sideboard. Silver chafing dishes, toast, eggs, ham, things she hadn't seen in months because her father hoarded money like a dragon hoarded gold. She filled a plate, sat down 3 chairs away from Adrian, and ate in silence. After a few minutes, he spoke. "Mrs. Hallowell will take you to the modiste this afternoon. You'll need a wardrobe." Eleanor swallowed a bite of toast. "I have clothes." "Not appropriate ones." "I see." Adrian picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. "There's a dinner tomorrow night, the Ashtons. You'll attend, all right? You'll be introduced as my wife. People will stare, They'll ask questions. You'll smile, deflect, and say nothing of substance. Eleanor looked at him. I've been doing that my entire life. Adrian's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Good. He stood, folded the newspaper under his arm. I'll be at my office most of the day. Don't wait up. Then he walked out, leaving Eleanor alone at the table with half a plate of eggs and the distinct impression that she'd just been dismissed like a servant. She finished her breakfast slowly, methodically, and tried not to think about how much this felt like another kind of prison. Mrs. Hallowell appeared an hour later, tight-lipped and efficient. The carriage is ready, madam. Eleanor followed her outside and into a black lacquered coach with the Ashford crest stamped on the door. They rode in silence through the fashionable districts, Mayfair, Belgravia, until the coach stopped in front of a narrow shop with lace curtains and a discreet brass plaque that read Madame Colette, couturière. Inside, the shop smelled like silk and rosewater. A slim woman in her 50s approached, her eyes sharp and assessing. Mrs. Hallowell, how lovely to see you. Madame Colette's gaze shifted to Eleanor. And this must be the Duchess of Ashford, Mrs. Hallowell said, clipped. Madame Colette's eyebrows rose. I see. Congratulations, Your Grace. I hadn't heard it was a private ceremony, Mrs. Hallowell cut in. His Grace requires a full wardrobe, day dresses, evening gowns, accessories. He expects quality and speed. Madame Colette nodded slowly, still studying Eleanor. Of course. Your Grace, if you'll step this way. Eleanor followed her into a back room lined with mirrors and bolts of fabric. Madame Colette gestured to a low platform. Please, stand here. Eleanor stepped up. Madame Colette circled her, measuring tape in hand, eyes cataloging every line, every angle. You have good posture, Madame Colette said. Strong shoulders, narrow waist. The bones are excellent. Thank you, Eleanor said, though it didn't feel like a compliment, more like an appraisal. Madame Colette began taking measurements, bust, waist, hips, inseam, calling out numbers to an assistant who scribbled them down. Then she stepped back, tapping her chin. What colors does His Grace prefer? Eleanor blinked. I don't know. What do you prefer? I don't know that either. Madame Colette's expression softened just slightly. Then we'll start with what suits you. She pulled a length of deep emerald silk from a nearby shelf, held it up to Eleanor's face. This, and perhaps charcoal, burgundy, nothing too soft. You're not a pastel woman. Eleanor looked at herself in the mirror, pale skin, dark hair, gray eyes that gave nothing away. Madame Colette was right. Soft colors would make her disappear. I'll trust your judgment, Eleanor said. Madame Colette smiled. Wise choice, Your Grace. By the time Eleanor returned to the Ashford townhouse, it was late afternoon. Mrs. Hallowell escorted her to the east wing without a word, then disappeared. Eleanor stood in her sitting room, still covered in dust, and wondered what she was supposed to do with the rest of the day. She thought about exploring the house, but it didn't feel like hers to explore. She thought about reading, but there were no books. She thought about writing to Lillian, then decided against it. What would she even say? Congratulations on escaping. I'm fine. Everything's fine. She settled for opening the windows, airing out the room, and organizing the few belongings she'd brought. A comb, a spare dress, a small leather journal her mother had given her years ago, before she died. Eleanor sat at the writing desk, opened the journal, and stared at the blank page. She didn't write. Just sat there, pen in hand, trying to figure out what the first sentence of this new life should be. Before she could decide, there was a knock at the door. Come in? A young maid entered, barely 16, red-haired and freckled. She bobbed a curtsy. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, I'm Mary. Mrs. Hallowell sent me to help you dress for dinner. Eleanor frowned. I thought the dinner was tomorrow. Mary's eyes widened. No, ma'am. It's tonight, in 2 hours. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Tonight. Yes, ma'am. Did His Grace not tell you? Mary shifted uncomfortably. I don't speak to His Grace, ma'am. Of course not. Why would Adrian bother telling his wife when the dinner actually was? Why would that matter? Eleanor closed the journal. All right, let's get started. The Ashton residence was a mansion in Grosvenor Square, all white marble and gilded chandeliers. Eleanor stepped out of the carriage on Adrian's arm and immediately felt every eye turned toward her. Whispers rippled through the crowd gathered at the entrance. Who is she? That's not Lillian Voss. I heard it was a last-minute substitution. Poor thing, she looks terrified. Eleanor wasn't terrified, but she was aware, painfully, acutely, that she was being assessed, weighed, and found lacking before she'd even crossed the threshold. Adrian's hand tightened slightly on her arm. Ignore them. I am. Smile. Eleanor smiled. It felt like baring teeth. They entered the ballroom together. The room was enormous, packed with London's elite, women in silk and diamonds, men in tailcoats and medals. An orchestra played in the corner. Servants circulated with champagne. Lady Ashton descended on them immediately, a tall woman with pearls and an expression like she'd just tasted something sour. Your Grace, how delightful. Her eyes flicked to Eleanor. And this must be your bride. Eleanor, Duchess of Ashford, Adrian said evenly. My wife. Lady Ashton's smile didn't reach her eyes. How lovely. We'd heard rumors, of course, but, well, rumors. She turned to Eleanor. You're Lord Voss's daughter, are you not? I am. The elder daughter. Yes. How, unexpected. Lady Ashton's gaze swept over Eleanor's gown. Emerald silk, perfectly tailored, Madame Colette's work. Though I must say the color suits you. Very bold. It wasn't a compliment. Eleanor met her eyes. Thank you, Lady Ashton. I've always preferred clarity to subtlety. Lady Ashton blinked, then laughed, a brittle sound. Indeed. Well, enjoy the evening. She swept away. Adrian glanced down at Eleanor. Nicely done. Was it? You didn't apologize, that's more than most would manage. Eleanor said nothing. She was too busy scanning the room, noting the clusters of women watching her, the men pretending not to stare. Every face a calculation, every smile a trap. Stay close, Mo, Adrian murmured. Let them come to you. Don't chase approval. I'm not chasing anything. Good. A man approached, tall, broad-shouldered, with a military bearing and a scar across his jaw. He bowed to Adrian. Blackthorne, didn't expect to see you at one of these affairs. Hartley. Adrian shook his hand. I could say the same. Duty calls. Hartley's eyes shifted to Eleanor. And who's this? My wife. Eleanor, this is Captain James Hartley. We served together briefly out west. Hartley's eyebrows shot up. Wife, you? Apparently. Hartley laughed, then caught himself. Apologies, Your Grace. Just surprised. Last I heard, Blackthorne here swore he'd never marry. Eleanor smiled thinly. People change. Indeed they do. Hartley studied her for a moment, then nodded. Well, welcome to the circus, Your Grace. If you need an ally in this nest of vipers, you've got one. It was the first genuine thing anyone had said to her all night. Thank you, Captain. Hartley drifted off, and Adrian leaned closer. He means it. Hartley's solid. One ally, Eleanor murmured, out of 100 enemies. Better than none. Before Eleanor could respond, a woman in a crimson gown appeared at her elbow, young, blonde, beautiful in the way that required effort and money. Your Grace, she said, voice saccharine, I'm Lady Caroline Winters. I simply had to introduce myself. Eleanor turned. How kind. I knew Lillian, you see. We were presented together. Such a sweet girl. Caroline's smile sharpened. I was so looking forward to seeing her tonight. What a pity she's indisposed. Eleanor held her gaze. Yes, a pity. Still, I'm sure you'll do your best to fill her shoes, even if they're rather large shoes to fill. The insult was delicate, wrapped in silk, but it landed like a slap. Eleanor didn't flinch. I've never been interested in filling anyone's shoes, Lady Caroline. I prefer to make my own path. Caroline's smile froze. How quaint. She turned and walked away, hips swaying. Adrian exhaled slowly. You're making enemies. I didn't start this. No, but you're not backing down either. Eleanor looked up at him. Did you expect me to? Adrian's expression was unreadable. No, I suppose I didn't. The dinner itself was a nightmare of forks and false smiles. Eleanor sat beside Adrian at a long table, surrounded by people who spoke in code and laughed at jokes she didn't understand. She answered questions carefully, deflected personal inquiries, and endured the constant weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. Across the table, a woman in pearls leaned toward her companion and whispered something. They both glanced at Eleanor, then looked away, smirking. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Beside her, Adrian spoke quietly without looking at her. Breathe. I am breathing. You're gripping your fork like you want to stab someone. Eleanor loosened her grip. Apologies. Don't apologize, just don't give them the satisfaction. Eleanor nodded, took a sip of wine, smiled when the man across from her asked a bland question about the weather. But inside she was calculating, learning, noting who smiled to her face and stabbed her in the back, who avoided her entirely, who watched with curiosity instead of contempt. Captain Hartley, seated farther down, caught her eye and raised his glass slightly. Eleanor raised hers in return. It was a small thing, but it steadied her. Well, after dinner, the guests moved to the drawing room for cards and conversation. Eleanor stood near the fireplace, nursing a glass of sherry, trying to look composed while her feet screamed in shoes that didn't quite fit. A group of women stood nearby, voices low but audible. Did you see her dress? Madame Colette, no doubt. Money can buy taste, I suppose, but not breeding. Or beauty. Poor Blackthorn. Imagine being trapped with that. Eleanor's hand tightened on her glass. One of the women glanced over, realized Eleanor had heard, and didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. She just smiled and turned back to her friends. Eleanor set down her glass before she threw it. She turned and walked toward the terrace doors, needing air, needing space, needing... Running away already? Eleanor stopped, turned. Lady Caroline stood there, flanked by two other women, all of them watching her with predatory interest. Just stepping outside? Eleanor said evenly. Of course. It must be overwhelming. All of this. Caroline gestured vaguely at the room. You're not used to it, are you? Society. Expectations. Being watched. Eleanor met her gaze. I'm used to being underestimated. Caroline's smile sharpened. Oh, I'm not underestimating you, Your Grace. I just think it's important to know one's place, and yours is precarious, wouldn't you say? A last-minute substitute. The unwanted sister, married to a man who didn't choose you. The other women tittered. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her chest. Not anger. Anger was hot, uncontrolled. This was something colder, sharper. You're right, Eleanor said quietly. I wasn't chosen. I was the backup plan, the consolation prize, and every person in this room knows it. She stepped closer, voice dropping. But here's what you don't know, Lady Caroline. I've spent my entire life being overlooked, dismissed, and sold off like furniture, and I'm still here, still standing, while women like you spend your days worrying about who wore the right dress and said the right thing and married the right man. Eleanor smiled. And it wasn't kind. So yes, my place is precarious, but at least it's mine. Can you say the same? Yes. Caroline's face went white. Before she could respond, Adrian appeared at Eleanor's elbow. We're leaving, he said quietly. Eleanor didn't argue. She turned, walked past Caroline without another glance, and followed Adrian out of the drawing room, through the entry hall, and into the cold night air. The carriage was waiting. They climbed in without speaking. As the coach pulled away, Adrian finally broke the silence. What did you say to her? The truth. That's not an answer. Eleanor looked at him. I told her I wasn't going to apologize for existing. Adrian leaned back against the seat, studying her. You're going to make this harder than it needs to be. I didn't realize survival was supposed to be easy. It's not survival if you're fighting everyone. Then what is it? Adrian didn't answer. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they arrived home, Eleanor went straight to her rooms. Mary was waiting, ready to help her undress, but Eleanor dismissed her. I can manage. Thank you. Mary curtsied and left. Eleanor stood alone in the center of the room, still wearing the emerald gown, and felt the weight of the evening crash down on her all at once. She'd survived. Barely. But at what cost? She crossed to the window, pressed her forehead against the cold glass, and closed her eyes. A knock at the door. Come in. Adrian entered. He'd removed his jacket, loosened his cravat. He looked tired. You handled tonight poorly, he said. Eleanor turned. Excuse me? You antagonized people, made yourself a target. I was already a target. And you made it worse. Eleanor's hands curled into fists. What was I supposed to do? Smile while they tore me apart? Apologize for existing? You were supposed to be invisible, Adrian said, voice hard. Let them talk. Let them whisper. Don't engage. That's your strategy? Invisibility? It's survival. It's cowardice. Adrian's eyes went cold. Careful. Why? Eleanor stepped toward him, anger finally spilling over. What are you going to do? Send me back to my father? Throw me out? You're stuck with me, Your Grace, just like I'm stuck with you. So maybe instead of telling me how to survive, you could try actually supporting your wife. I don't owe you support. No, you owe me nothing, just like I owe you nothing. Eleanor's voice shook, but she didn't stop. But here's what I know. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being invisible. I'm not going to shrink so that people like Lady Caroline can feel bigger. I didn't survive my father just to be crushed by a bunch of bored aristocrats with nothing better to do than tear down anyone who doesn't fit their mold. Adrian stared at her. You think I don't understand that? I think you've built walls so high you've forgotten what it's like to actually fight for something. I fight every day. For what? Money? Power? Your name? Eleanor shook her head. I'm fighting to exist. There's a difference. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Adrian turned and walked to the door. We have another engagement in 3 days, he said without looking back. Try not to burn every bridge before then. He left. Eleanor stood alone, shaking, furious, and utterly exhausted. She pulled off the emerald gown, let it pool on the floor, and climbed into bed still wearing her shift. Tomorrow, she'd figure out how to navigate this minefield. Tonight, she just needed to stop feeling like she was drowning. 3 days later, Eleanor attended a garden party at the Duchess of Marlborough's estate. She wore a charcoal dress, hair pinned back, and a smile that felt like armor. Adrian walked beside her, silent, distant. The party was smaller than the Ashton dinner, but no less brutal. Women circulated in clusters, sipping tea, trading gossip. Men stood in groups near the hedge maze, smoking cigars. Eleanor moved through the crowd alone. Adrian had disappeared almost immediately, drawn into conversation with a group of businessmen. She found a bench near the rose garden and sat, grateful for a moment of peace. It lasted 30 seconds. Your Grace. Eleanor looked up. A woman stood before her, older, perhaps 50, dressed in lavender with silver hair and sharp eyes. She smiled. I'm Lady Beatrice Hargrave. May I sit? Eleanor gestured to the bench. Please. Lady Beatrice sat, arranged her skirts, and studied Eleanor with open curiosity. You're causing quite a stir, Eleanor sighed. So I've heard. Good. Eleanor blinked. Good. This city thrives on stagnation, Lady Beatrice said. Everyone playing the same games, saying the same things, marrying for the same reasons. Someone like you, someone who doesn't fit the mold, shakes things up. And that terrifies them. I'm not trying to terrify anyone. Then you're doing it wrong, Lady Beatrice smiled. Fear is power, my dear. Use it. Eleanor studied the older woman. Why are you telling me this? Because I like you, and because I watched my own daughter get chewed up and spit out by this society. She didn't survive it. Lady Beatrice's expression hardened. But you might. If you stop trying to fit in and start making them accommodate you. Eleanor frowned. How? Stop apologizing. Stop shrinking. And for heaven's sake, stop letting your husband treat you like an inconvenience. Eleanor's jaw tightened. He doesn't. He does. I've watched him all morning. He hasn't looked at you once, hasn't spoken to you, hasn't defended you when the vultures started circling. Lady Beatrice leaned closer. You deserve better. And if he won't give it to you, take it yourself. Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion erupted near the house. Raised voices, a woman's cry. Eleanor stood, heart pounding. Lady Beatrice rose beside her. What's happening? They hurried toward the crowd gathering near the terrace. In the center stood Adrian, fists clenched, facing a man Eleanor didn't recognize. Tall, thin, with a sneer that made her skin crawl. Disgrace to the title, the man was saying. Marrying some nobody just to secure votes. Pathetic. Adrian's voice was low, dangerous. Walk away, Pemberton. Or what? You'll hit me? Prove you're nothing but a frontier thug? Pemberton laughed. You don't belong here, Blackthorn, and neither does she. He pointed at Eleanor. The crowd turned. Eleanor's blood went cold. Adrian stepped forward, and for a moment she thought he might actually hit the man. But he didn't. He just stood there, silent, rigid, trapped by the rules of a society that would destroy him if he showed weakness. Pemberton smirked. That's what I thought. He turned to leave, and Eleanor made a choice. She stepped forward, voice clear and cold. Lord Pemberton? He stopped, turned. Eleanor walked towards him, every eye on her, and stopped 3 feet away. You're right, she said. I don't belong here. I wasn't raised in ballrooms. I don't know the right people, wear the right clothes, or say the right things. She paused. But neither does my husband. And yet, somehow, he's built more in 10 years than you've inherited in 50. So before you lecture anyone about disgrace, perhaps you should ask yourself what you've actually accomplished. Besides spending other people's money and insulting women at garden parties. The crowd went silent. Pemberton's face turned purple. How dare! I dare, Eleanor said quietly, because, unlike you, I have nothing left to lose. She turned, walked past Adrian, and kept walking until she reached the carriage. She didn't look back. Adrian found her 20 minutes later. Eleanor sat in the carriage, hands folded, staring at nothing. He climbed in, closed the door. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian said, You just made an enemy of one of the most influential men in Parliament. Eleanor didn't look at him. I know. He'll make our lives hell. I know. Then why did you do it? Eleanor finally turned to face him. Because you wouldn't. Adrian's jaw tightened. I was handling it. You were standing there, letting him insult both of us, because you're too afraid of breaking their rules. Eleanor's voice shook. Well, I'm not afraid, not anymore. I'm done being quiet. I'm done being invisible. If they're going to hate me anyway, I might as well give them a reason. Adrian stared at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he leaned back against the seat and exhaled slowly. You're going to get us both destroyed. Maybe, Eleanor said. Or maybe I'll teach you how to fight back. The carriage began to move. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, Eleanor felt like she'd actually won something, even if she didn't know what it cost yet. The silence in the carriage stretched until it felt like a third passenger. Adrian stared out the window, jaw tight, fingers drumming against his knee. A nervous habit Eleanor had noticed only twice before, both times when he was working through a problem he didn't have an answer for. She didn't interrupt, didn't apologize, just sat across from him, spine straight, and waited for whatever came next. When they finally pulled up to the townhouse, Adrian climbed out without offering his hand. Eleanor followed, watching his broad shoulders disappear through the front door. By the time she reached the entry hall, he was already halfway up the stairs. Your Grace, she called. He stopped, didn't turn. Are we going to talk about this? There's nothing to talk about. His voice was flat. You made your choice. Now we deal with the consequences. We? Eleanor climbed 3 steps. Or me? Adrian turned then, and the look in his eyes was something between frustration and exhaustion. You think I can protect you from Pemberton, from the people he controls? You just declared war on half of Parliament. I declared that I exist. If that's war, then they started it. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Eleanor climbed another step. You're angry because I didn't play by the rules, because I made noise when I was supposed to stay quiet, because I reminded everyone that you married the wrong sister, and maybe, just maybe, that makes you look weak. Adrian's hands curled into fists. That's not, isn't it? Eleanor stopped 2 steps below him, close enough to see the muscle ticking in his jaw. You've spent this entire marriage keeping me at arm's length. Separate rooms, separate lives. I'm your wife in name only, and that's exactly how you want it. But when I defend myself, suddenly it reflects on you. Suddenly it matters. Everything you do reflects on me, Adrian said, voice hard. That's how this works. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you agreed to marry a woman you didn't want. The words hung in the air like smoke. Adrian's expression shuddered. I have work to do. He turned and walked up the rest of the stairs, disappearing into the west wing, his wing, the one she'd never been invited into. Eleanor stood alone in the entry hall, heart pounding, hands shaking, and realized she'd just pushed the only person in this city who might have been an ally. Mrs. Hallowell appeared from the shadows like a ghost. Shall I have dinner sent to your rooms, Your Grace? Eleanor didn't look at her. No, I'm not hungry. She climbed the stairs to the east wing, closed the door behind her, and pressed her back against the wood. Her chest felt tight, her throat burned. She'd won the battle at the garden party, but she might have just lost the war. 2 days passed without a word from Adrian. Eleanor saw him once, briefly, in the hallway. He nodded, said nothing, and kept walking. She spent the time reading, books she found in a forgotten library on the 2nd floor, dusty volumes about history and law and philosophy that no one had touched in years. She memorized names, connections, the tangled web of alliances that held London society together. If she was going to survive this, she needed to understand the battlefield. On the 3rd morning, a letter arrived. Mary brought it on a silver tray, her expression nervous. For you, Your Grace. From Lord Voss. Eleanor's stomach clenched. She took the letter, broke the seal, and read. Eleanor, I trust you are settling into your new role. I have heard troubling reports of your behavior at recent social engagements. Remember that you represent not only the Duke of Ashford, but our family name. Discretion and obedience are expected. Additionally, I require your presence at the townhouse this Thursday at 2 o'clock. There are family matters we must discuss. Your father, Lord Gerald Voss. Eleanor read it twice, then crumpled it in her fist. Your Grace, Mary asked tentatively, is everything all right? Fine. Eleanor smoothed the paper out, reread the last line. Family matters. That could mean anything, or it could mean exactly what she feared. Lillian. She thought of her sister, soft, sheltered, terrified of their father, but too young to fight back. If Gerald was summoning Eleanor, it wasn't for tea and conversation. It was because he wanted something, and she had a sinking feeling she knew what. Thursday came cold and gray. Eleanor dressed carefully. A deep blue gown, hair pinned tight, no jewelry. Armor without the appearance of armor. She told Mrs. Hallowell she'd be out for the afternoon and left before the housekeeper could ask questions. The Voss townhouse looked smaller than she remembered, shabbier. The paint was peeling near the doorframe, the brass knocker tarnished. Money troubles, probably. Her father had always been good at spending and terrible at earning. The butler let her in without a smile. Lord Voss is expecting you in the study. Eleanor walked through the familiar hallways, same faded wallpaper, same portraits of ancestors who'd died rich and left nothing behind, and found her father waiting behind his desk, glass of brandy in hand. Eleanor, punctual as always. Gerald gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. She sat. Gerald studied her, eyes calculating. You've been making quite a name for yourself. Have I? Don't play coy. Half of London is talking about your little outburst at the Marlborough garden party. Pemberton's furious. He's already started pulling strings against Blackthorn in Parliament. Eleanor kept her voice even. Then he's more fragile than I thought. Gerald's mouth thinned. You were supposed to be quiet, invisible. Instead, you're drawing attention, making enemies. I was supposed to be Lillian, Eleanor cut in, but you sold me instead, so forgive me if I don't follow your instructions anymore. Gerald's hand tightened on his glass. You're still my daughter. In name only. Careful, Eleanor. Why? What are you going to do? You already traded me away. You don't have leverage anymore. Gerald leaned back, smile thin and cold. Don't I? Eleanor's pulse quickened. What do you want? It's not about what I want. It's about what Lillian needs. He paused, letting the words sink in. She's been in talks with the Earl of Hastings. Older man, established, looking for a young wife. The settlement would be substantial. Eleanor's blood went cold. No. It's a good match, better than she could hope for given the circumstances. She's 18. Old enough. She doesn't want this. What she wants is irrelevant. Gerald drained his brandy, set the glass down. The contracts are being drawn up. The engagement will be announced next month. I thought you should know. Eleanor stood, hands gripping the chair back. You can't do this. I can, and I will. I won't let you. Gerald laughed. And what exactly are you going to do, Eleanor? You have no power here, no money, no influence. You're married to a man who barely tolerates you. You think he'll help? You think he cares? Eleanor's nails bit into the wood. I'll find a way. No, you won't. Gerald stood, walked around the desk, stopped inches from her. You're going to go back to your husband's house, play the dutiful Duchess, and stay out of this. Because if you interfere, if you so much as breathe a word to Lillian, I will make sure everyone knows exactly how desperate Blackthorn was to marry you, how he took damaged goods because he had no other choice. Eleanor's vision tunneled. You're lying. Am I? Gerald smiled. Try me. For a moment, Eleanor couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at her to hit him, to fight, to do something. But he was right. She had no leverage, no allies, no way to stop him. Unless... She turned and walked out, ignoring her father's laughter, echoing behind her. Eleanor didn't go back to the Ashford townhouse. Instead, she walked, block after block, through the gray London afternoon, trying to think, trying to find an angle, a solution, anything that didn't end with Lillian trapped the same way Eleanor had been. She found herself in front of a tavern near the docks, rough, loud, the kind of place where no one cared who you were or where you came from. She slipped inside, found a corner table, and ordered tea she didn't drink. An hour passed, then 2. She was still sitting there when Captain Hartley walked in. He spotted her immediately, surprise flickering across his face. He crossed the room, stopped at her table. Your Grace, this is unexpected. Eleanor looked up. Captain Hartley. Mind if I sit? She gestured to the empty chair. Hartley sat, signaled the barkeep for a drink, then studied Eleanor. You look like hell. Thank you. What are you doing here? Thinking. About? Eleanor hesitated, then, because she had no one else to ask, she said, How do you fight someone who holds all the power? Hartley leaned back, considering. Depends. What kind of power? Legal, social, financial? All 3? Yes. Hartley whistled low. That's a hard fight. I know. Can you win? I don't know. Eleanor met his eyes. But I have to try. Hartley was quiet for a moment. Then he said, When I was out west, there was a standoff. My unit against a group of raiders who'd taken hostages. We were outnumbered, outgunned. Every strategy we had ended with people dying. What did you do? Change the rules. Hartley smiled grimly. We couldn't win the fight they wanted, so we made them fight a different one. Eleanor frowned. How? We didn't go in guns blazing. We waited, watched, found out what they wanted more than the hostages. Turned out, they wanted safe passage out of the territory. So we gave it to them. Let them walk. Got the hostages back without a shot fired. You let them go? We let them think they won. Then we arrested them at the border. Hartley's smile widened. Sometimes you can't beat an enemy head on. You have to outthink them. Eleanor stared at him, mind racing. Her father held all the cards. But what did he want more than anything? Money, status, control? And he was willing to sell Lillian to get it. But what if Eleanor could offer him something better? She stood abruptly. I have to go. Hartley blinked. Now? Yes, thank you, Captain. For what? Reminding me how to fight. She left before he could respond. Eleanor arrived at the Ashford townhouse just as the sun was setting. She found Adrian in his study, bent over a stack of papers, lamplight casting shadows across his face. She didn't knock, just walked in. Adrian looked up, startled. Eleanor, where have you been? I need your help. He set down his pen. With what? My father is forcing Lillian into a marriage. With the Earl of Hastings. She doesn't want it, but he's going through with it anyway. Adrian's expression hardened. That's not my concern. It should be. Why? Eleanor stepped closer. Because if you help me stop this, I'll give you what you actually want. Adrian frowned. Which is? An heir. The room went silent. Adrian stood slowly. What are you saying? Eleanor forced herself to hold his gaze. You married me for an alliance, for legitimacy. But a marriage without an heir is fragile. People already question us. If we have a child, that changes. You get stability, continuation, everything you need to solidify your position. Adrian's eyes narrowed. And in exchange, I help you save your sister. Yes, that's not a small favor, Eleanor. Your father has connections. Going against him could cost me votes, support. It could also show that you're not afraid of him, that you don't bend to bullies. Eleanor stepped closer. You've spent this entire marriage worried about appearing weak. Here's your chance to prove you're not. Adrian studied her, jaw tight. Why now? Why does this matter so much to you? Because she's the only family I have left that's worth saving. Eleanor's voice cracked just slightly. And because I know what it's like to be sold off like livestock. I won't let it happen to her. Adrian turned away, pacing to the window. The silence stretched. Finally, he said, If I do this, if I help you, there's no going back. We can't pretend this is a business arrangement anymore. I know. You'd be tied to me, permanently. I already am. Adrian turned, and for the first time she saw something besides walls in his eyes. Doubt, maybe. Or something closer to fear. And if I say no? Eleanor's hands curled into fists. Then I'll do it myself, and probably fail. But at least I'll have tried. Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room, stopped in front of her, and held out his hand. All right, we'll do it together. Eleanor took his hand. It was the first time they'd touched without obligation. The plan came together over the next 3 days. Adrian contacted his solicitor, digging into the Earl of Hastings' finances. Turned out the man was drowning in debt, desperate for a cash infusion. The marriage to Lillian wasn't about love or even heirs. It was about survival. He needs £50,000 to cover his debts, Adrian said, spreading papers across the dining table. Your father promised him a dowry of $30,000. It's not enough. Eleanor leaned over the documents. So we offer him more. We offer him something better. I pay off his debts in full. In exchange, he backs out of the engagement. And my father loses the deal. And his leverage. Adrian looked up. But we have to move fast. If the contracts are signed, it's binding. Eleanor nodded. When? Tomorrow night. There's a gala at the Pemberton estate. Half of Parliament will be there, including your father and the Earl. Adrian's mouth tightened. It's a risk. Pemberton already hates us. Going into his territory, I don't care. Eleanor's voice was steel. We're going. Adrian studied her, then nodded. All right. The Pemberton estate was a fortress of marble and malice. Eleanor walked in on Adrian's arm, dressed in burgundy silk, feeling every eye turned toward her. Whispers followed them like a shadow. They shouldn't be here. After what she said, Pemberton's going to destroy them. Eleanor kept her chin up, her grip on Adrian's arm steady. They found the Earl of Hastings near the card tables, thin, gray-haired, sweating despite the cool air. Adrian approached directly. "Lord Hastings, a word?" Hastings looked up, eyes wary. "Your Grace, I didn't expect to see you here. I need 5 minutes of your time. Privately." Hastings hesitated, then nodded. They moved to a side room, Eleanor following. Adrian didn't waste time. "I know about your debts, and I know why you're marrying Lillian Voss." Hastings' face went pale. "That's none of your— 50,000 pounds. I'll pay it. All of it, today." Adrian's voice was flat, final. "In exchange, you walk away from the engagement." Hastings stared. "Why would you do that?" "Because my wife asked me to." Hastings looked at Eleanor, then back at Adrian. "And if I refuse? Then I'll make sure every creditor you have knows exactly how deep your debts run, and that you're marrying a girl young enough to be your granddaughter to cover them." Adrian stepped closer. "Your choice. Take the money and walk away with your dignity, or refuse and I'll make sure you lose everything." Hastings swallowed hard. I need to think." "You have 30 seconds. Hastings looked at Eleanor again. She met his gaze, unflinching. He exhaled shakily. "All right, I'll do it." Adrian nodded. "Smart choice." He pulled a folded document from his coat. "Sign this. It's a contract releasing you from all agreements with Lord Voss. My solicitor will have the funds transferred by morning." Hastings signed with trembling hands. When it was done, Adrian took the paper, folded it, and turned to Eleanor. "It's over." Eleanor felt something tight in her chest loosen. "Thank you." Before Adrian could respond, the door burst open. Lord Pemberton stood there, face twisted with rage, Gerald Voss right behind him. "What the hell is going on here?" Pemberton demanded. Adrian turned, expression cool. "Private business, none of your concern." "Like hell it isn't." Gerald pushed past Pemberton, eyes locked on Eleanor. "What did you do?" Eleanor stepped forward. "I saved my sister." Gerald's face went red. "You had no right." "I had every right. She's my sister, not your property. She's my daughter, and I'll do with her as I see fit." "Not anymore." Adrian moved to stand beside Eleanor, the signed contract in his hand. "Hastings is out. The engagement's off. And if you try to force another marriage on her, I'll make sure every scandal, every debt, every dirty deal you've ever made goes public." Gerald stared at him, shaking with fury. "You're making a mistake, Blackthorne." "No," Adrian said quietly. "I'm done making mistakes." Pemberton stepped forward, voice dripping with venom. "You think you can walk into my house, interfere in private agreements, and walk away? You're finished, both of you. I'll have you blacklisted from every club, every business. Try it." Adrian's voice dropped. "Dangerous. And I'll pull every investment I have from the companies you control. I'll tank your shipping interests, your railroad shares, everything. You want war, Pemberton? I'll bury you." Pemberton's mouth opened, closed. He looked at Gerald, at Eleanor, at Adrian. Then he turned and walked out. Gerald lingered, eyes burning. "This isn't over." Eleanor met his gaze. "Yes, it is." Gerald left, slamming the door behind him. Eleanor's knees nearly buckled. Adrian caught her arm, steadying her. "You all right?" She nodded, though her hands were shaking. "We did it. We did." They stood there for a moment, the weight of what they'd just done settling over them. Then the door opened again, and Captain Hartley stuck his head in. "I heard shouting. Everyone still alive?" Adrian almost smiled. "Barely." "Good, because there's something you should see." They followed Hartley into the main ballroom. The crowd had gathered near the entrance, murmuring, pointing. Eleanor pushed through, Adrian beside her, and then she saw Lillian. Her sister stood in the doorway, pale and wide-eyed, wearing a traveling cloak and clutching a small bag. "Eleanor?" Lillian's voice was small, scared. Eleanor crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her sister into her arms. "You're safe," Eleanor whispered. "You're safe." Lillian clung to her, shaking. "Father said, he said I had to marry." "Not anymore. It's over." Lillian pulled back, tears streaming. "How?" Eleanor glanced at Adrian. He stood a few feet away, watching them. "I had help," Eleanor said quietly. Lillian followed her gaze, eyes widening. "Your husband?" Adrian stepped forward. "You're welcome to stay with us, as long as you need." Lillian looked at Eleanor, uncertain. Eleanor nodded. "It's safe, I promise." For the first time in weeks, Lillian smiled. The crowd was still watching, whispering, speculating, but Eleanor didn't care. She'd saved her sister, and she'd done it with a man she was starting to realize wasn't the enemy she'd thought. They left the gala together, Adrian, Eleanor, and Lillian, and rode home in silence. When they arrived, Adrian showed Lillian to a guest room, quiet and patient. Then he turned to Eleanor. "You should get some rest." Eleanor nodded, but didn't move. "Thank you. For tonight. For all of it." Adrian's expression softened, just slightly. "You didn't leave me much choice." "I know." He started to walk away, then stopped. "Eleanor?" "Yes?" "You were right about fighting back, about not being invisible." He paused. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Before she could respond, he turned and walked toward the West Wing. Eleanor stood alone in the hallway, heart pounding, mind racing. Something had shifted tonight, between them, between her and this life. She climbed the stairs to her room, exhaustion finally catching up. She was halfway through undressing when she heard the crash, loud, violent, coming from the West Wing. Eleanor's blood went cold. She grabbed a robe, ran barefoot down the hallway, following the sound of breaking glass. Adrian's study door was open. Inside, he was on his knees, clutching his side, blood seeping through his shirt. "Adrian!" He looked up, face white, eyes unfocused. Behind him, the window was shattered, and on the floor, inches from his hand, was a knife. Eleanor's scream brought the house to life. Footsteps thundered up the stairs, servants, Mrs. Hallowell, Mary stumbling in, half-dressed. But Eleanor barely heard them. She was already on her knees beside Adrian, hands pressed against the spreading crimson stain on his shirt. "Don't move," she said, voice shaking. "Don't—" "The window!" Adrian gasped. His face was gray, slicked with sweat. Someone was— "I don't care, stop talking!" Eleanor's hands were slick with blood, too much blood. She looked up at Mrs. Hallowell standing frozen in the doorway. "Get a doctor, now!" Mrs. Hallowell didn't move, eyes wide with shock. "Now!" The housekeeper jerked into motion, barking orders at a footman who took off running. Eleanor turned back to Adrian. His eyes were starting to lose focus. "Stay with me. Do you hear me? You don't get to die after everything we just—" "Eleanor." His hand found hers, grip weak. "Lillian, keep her safe." "Shut up. You're going to keep her safe yourself." Adrian's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Then his eyes rolled back. "No, no, no, no." Eleanor pressed harder against the wound, feeling his blood pulse hot between her fingers. "Adrian!" Captain Hartley appeared out of nowhere, still in his evening clothes from the gala. He must have followed them. He took one look at Adrian and cursed. "Move aside. I can't. The bleeding. Move." Hartley's voice was command, not request. Eleanor shifted back, and he tore open Adrian's shirt, revealing a deep gash along his ribs. "Knife wound. Missed the organs, but he's losing blood fast." Hartley yanked off his cravat, wadded it against the wound. "Keep pressure. Don't let up." Eleanor pressed down with both hands, feeling Adrian's breath stutter beneath her palms. Hartley stood, scanning the room. Shattered window, knife on the floor. His expression went cold. "This wasn't random." "I know." Eleanor's voice was steady, despite the terror clawing at her throat. "Someone tried to kill him. Or send a message." Hartley moved to the window, looked out into the dark. "They're gone now, but they'll try again." Mary appeared with blankets. Between them, they got Adrian onto the floor, elevated his legs, wrapped him in wool. Eleanor didn't leave his side, didn't stop pressing against the wound even when her arms started shaking. "Where's the damn doctor?" Hartley growled. "Coming," Mrs. Hallowell said from the doorway, wringing her hands. "He's coming." It felt like hours, probably closer to 20 minutes. The doctor arrived, an older man with steady hands and a leather bag that smelled like carbolic. He knelt beside Adrian, examined the wound, and nodded once. "Good work keeping pressure. You may have saved his life." He looked at Eleanor. "I need to clean and stitch this. It won't be pleasant. You should step out." "No." The doctor's eyebrows rose. "Your Grace, I'm staying." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, hold the lamp then. I'll need light." Eleanor held the lamp while the doctor worked, cleaning, stitching, bandaging. Adrian drifted in and out of consciousness, gasping when the needle bit deep. Eleanor kept her hands steady, even when her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. When it was done, the doctor sat back. "He'll need rest, no movement for at least a week. The wound needs to stay clean and dry. If he develops a fever, I'll watch him," Eleanor said. The doctor looked at her, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. "I believe you will." He stood, packed his bag. "I'll return tomorrow to check on him. Send for me immediately if anything changes." Hartley walked him out. Eleanor stayed on the floor beside Adrian, one hand resting on his chest, feeling the uneven rise and fall of his breathing. His eyes opened, just barely. "Still here? Where else would I be? Somewhere safer." His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "There is nowhere safer." Eleanor brushed sweat-damp hair back from his forehead. "Not until we figure out who did this. Pemberton. Has to be. Or my father." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Either way, they just declared war. Then we finish it." Eleanor's voice was steel. "But first, you rest. Eleanor, rest. That's an order." Adrian's mouth curved slightly. "Since when do you give me orders?" "Since you got yourself stabbed trying to help me." She leaned closer. "Now sleep. I'll be here when you wake up." His eyes drifted closed. Within minutes, his breathing evened out. Eleanor sat there on the hard floor, blood drying on her hands, and made a decision. She wasn't going to hide anymore. Wasn't going to play by their rules or wait for the next attack. If they wanted war, she'd give them war. But on her terms. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She stayed beside Adrian, watching the shallow rise and fall of his chest, listening for any change in his breathing. Hartley took up position in a chair by the door, pistol resting on his knee. Neither of them spoke. They just waited. Dawn came pale and cold. Adrian woke around 6, groggy and disoriented. Eleanor helped him drink water, checked his bandages. No fever yet, no fresh bleeding. The doctor's work was holding. "How long was I out?" Adrian asked. 6 hours. He tried to sit up. Eleanor pushed him back down. The doctor said no movement. "You need to heal." Eleanor's voice left no room for argument. "Everything else can wait." Adrian stared at her, frustration and something else warring in his expression. Then he exhaled and lay back. "Fine. But you need to rest too." "I'm fine." "Eleanor, I said I'm fine." She stood, moved to the window. The glass had been boarded over during the night, blocking out the gray morning light. "Hartley, any movement outside?" "Nothing," Hartley said from his post. "But we should assume they're watching. Then we give them something to watch." Eleanor turned. "I need to send a message to Lady Beatrice Hargrave." Adrian frowned. "Why?" "Because she told me that fear is power, and I'm about to teach this city what fear looks like." Lady Beatrice arrived 2 hours later. She swept into the drawing room where Eleanor waited, took one look at Eleanor's blood-stained dress and haunted eyes, and said, "Who do I need to kill?" Eleanor almost laughed. "I don't know yet, but I will." Beatrice sat, arranged her skirts. "Tell me everything." Eleanor did. The engagement, the confrontation at the gala, Adrian's intervention. The attack. the knife through the window. When she finished, Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. Pemberton or your father? Possibly both. She tapped her fingers against her reticule. They're trying to frighten you, show you that defiance has consequences. It won't work. I know. Beatrice smiled, sharp as broken glass. So what do you need from me? Information, leverage, anything that can hurt them more than they hurt us. Beatrice's smile widened. Oh, my dear, you've come to the right woman. Over the next hour, Beatrice laid out a network of secrets Eleanor hadn't known existed. Pemberton's gambling debts, his mistress tucked away in a house in Kensington, Gerald's embezzlement from his own business partners, the deals he'd made that skirted legality, the people he'd betrayed. All of this is common knowledge among the right people, Beatrice said, but it's never been compiled, never weaponized, until now. Eleanor listened, absorbing every detail, every name, every weakness. What are you going to do? Beatrice asked finally. Eleanor met her eyes. I'm going to make sure they know that attacking my husband was the worst mistake they ever made. Beatrice studied her, then nodded. Good. I'll help however I can. Why? Eleanor asked. Why help me? Beatrice's expression softened. Because I watched my daughter get destroyed by these people. I couldn't save her, but I can help you. She stood. And because you're the first person I've seen in years who refuses to break. After Beatrice left, Eleanor sat alone in the drawing room and began planning. Adrian was awake when she returned to the study. Someone, Mary probably, had helped him into a chair and brought fresh clothes. He looked better, still pale, but steadier, alert. You should be resting, Eleanor said. I've been resting for hours. My brain still works. He gestured to the papers spread across his desk, documents, ledgers, correspondence. I've been going through everything, looking for connections. And? Pemberton's involved. I'm certain of it, but he didn't act alone. Adrian looked up. Your father's name appears 3 times in Pemberton's recent correspondence. Business deals, shared investments, they're working together. Eleanor's hands curled into fists. Then we take them both down. How? She told him what Beatrice had shared, the gambling debts, the mistress, the embezzlement. With each revelation, Adrian's expression grew darker. If we go public with this, we don't go public, Eleanor interrupted. Not yet. First, we give them a chance to back down. Adrian frowned. You want to negotiate? I want them to understand that we hold the cards now, that if they come after us again, we'll destroy them. Eleanor leaned against the desk. We send a private message. Let them know we have the information. Give them one chance to walk away. And if they don't, then we burn them to the ground. Adrian studied her, something like admiration in his eyes. You've changed. No, I've just stopped hiding. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian said, This is dangerous, Eleanor. If they feel cornered, they might escalate. They already tried to kill you. How much more can they escalate? They could come after you, or Lillian. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Let them try. Adrian exhaled slowly. All right, we do it your way, but we do it smart, and we don't take unnecessary risks. Agreed. He held out his hand. Partners? Eleanor took it. His grip was warm, solid. Partners. The message went out that afternoon. Adrian drafted it himself, careful and precise. It outlined every piece of leverage they held, every debt, every scandal, every secret. It ended with a simple ultimatum. Cease all hostility or face public ruin. 2 copies. One to Pemberton, one to Gerald. They sent them by private courier and waited. The response came faster than expected. At 8 that evening, a knock at the door. Mrs. Hallowell answered, returned white-faced. Lord Pemberton is here, Your Grace. He's demanding to see you. Eleanor looked at Adrian. He was still too weak to stand for long, but his eyes were clear. Show him in, Eleanor said. Mrs. Hallowell hesitated. Your Grace, perhaps. Show him in. A minute later, Pemberton strode into the drawing room, face mottled with rage. He stopped when he saw Adrian sitting in the chair, bandaged but upright. Then his eyes shifted to Eleanor. You, he practically spat the word. You think you can threaten me? Eleanor stood perfectly still. I didn't threaten. I stated facts. Facts? Pemberton pulled the letter from his coat, crumpled it, threw it on the floor. You have no proof, no evidence, just rumors and lies. We have documents, Adrian said quietly. Signed letters, ledgers, witness statements, everything we need. Pemberton's face went from red to purple. You're bluffing. Try us. Eleanor's voice was ice. Attack us again, and every newspaper in London will know about your mistress, your debts, and the investments you made using embezzled funds from your own partners. You wouldn't dare, wouldn't I? Eleanor stepped closer. You tried to kill my husband. You threatened my family. You think I won't burn your entire life down to protect them? Pemberton stared at her, and for the first time Eleanor saw something other than contempt in his eyes. Fear. Walk away, Ed, Adrian said. Cease all hostility, and we'll keep this quiet. And if I refuse? Eleanor smiled. It wasn't kind. Then you lose everything. Your reputation, your business, your position in Parliament, everything. Pemberton's hands shook. You can't do this. We already have. For a long moment, Pemberton just stood there, breathing hard. Then he turned to Adrian. You're making a mistake, Blackthorne. Both of you. No, Adrian said. You made the mistake. We're just making sure you pay for it. Pemberton's mouth twisted. He looked at Eleanor one last time, hatred burning in his eyes, then turned and walked out about Solskjaer. The door slammed behind him. Eleanor's knees went weak. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. Adrian stood, slowly, carefully, and crossed to her. You all right? I think so. Eleanor looked up at him. Do you think he'll back down? I don't know, but we've shown him we're not afraid. That matters. What about my father? No word yet, but he'll respond. Men like him always do. Eleanor nodded, tried to calm her racing heart. Adrian's hand found hers, squeezed gently. You did well. We did well. His mouth curved. Yes, we did. Gerald's response came the next morning. Not a letter, a visit. Eleanor was with Lillian in the garden when Mrs. Hallowell found her, expression pinched. Your father is here, Your Grace. He's insisting on seeing you. Eleanor's stomach dropped. She looked at Lillian, who'd gone pale. I don't want to see him, Lillian whispered. You don't have to. Eleanor squeezed her hand. Stay here. I'll handle this. She found Gerald in the entry hall, pacing like a caged animal. He turned when she entered, eyes cold. Eleanor? Father, we need to talk, privately. Anything you have to say, you can say here. Gerald glanced at Mrs. Hallowell, hovering near the stairs. His jaw tightened. Fine, you want to play games? Let's play. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. I received your little message. Very dramatic. It wasn't meant to be dramatic. It was meant to be clear. Clear. Gerald laughed bitterly. You think you can threaten me? Me. I built this family. I made the connections, the deals. You sold your daughters like cattle, Eleanor cut in. You embezzled from your partners. You lied, cheated, and destroyed anyone who got in your way. And now you're going to stop. Or what? You'll ruin me? Gerald's smile was vicious. Go ahead, drag my name through the mud. But remember, Eleanor, you're a Voss too. My ruin is yours. Eleanor stepped closer. I stopped being a Voss the day you traded me away. My name is Blackthorne now, and if destroying you is what it takes to protect my sister, I'll do it without hesitation. Gerald's face went red. Lillian is my daughter. Lillian is under my protection, and my husband's. If you try to force another engagement, if you so much as contact her without her consent, we'll release everything we have, and you'll spend the rest of your life as a social pariah, broke and broken. You're bluffing. Am I? Eleanor held his gaze. Test me. For a long moment, Gerald just stared at her. Then something in his expression shifted. The rage faded, replaced by something colder. Calculation. You've changed, he said quietly. You used to be so easy to control. You never controlled me. You just convinced me I had no choice. Eleanor's voice was steady. But I have choices now. And I choose to protect the people I love, even if it means destroying you. Gerald was silent. Then he refolded the paper, tucked it back in his coat. Fine. I'll leave Lillian alone. For now. He moved toward the door, then paused. But this isn't over, Eleanor. You think you've won, but you've just made enemies you can't afford to have. I've always had enemies. The difference is, now I fight back. Gerald looked at her one last time, really looked, and for just a second, Eleanor saw something like recognition in his eyes. Maybe even respect. Then he turned and left. Eleanor stood alone in the entry hall, heart pounding, hands shaking, and realized she'd just severed the last tie to her old life. She was free, and terrified, and exhilarated. Adrian found her an hour later, sitting in the library with a book she wasn't reading. Your father's gone? He asked. Yes. How did it go? Eleanor set down the book. I think he'll leave Lillian alone. For now. And you? He knows we're serious, whether that's enough. She trailed off. I don't know. Adrian sat beside her, moving carefully. The wound was healing, but it still hurt. She could see it in the tightness around his mouth. You should be resting, she said. I've been resting all morning. I'm allowed to check on my wife. The word hung in the air between them. Wife. Not Duchess. Not arrangement. Wife. Eleanor looked at him. Why did you really help me? With Lillian? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Because you asked. That's not a reason. It's the only reason that matters. He leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. I've spent 10 years building walls, keeping people at arm's length, trusting no one. And it worked. I made money, built power, secured my position. He paused. But I was alone, and I didn't even realize it until you showed up and refused to disappear. Eleanor's throat tightened. I'm not trying to... I know, that's the point. Adrian looked at her. You didn't ask for my approval. You didn't try to please me. You just existed, loudly, stubbornly, and somewhere along the way I realized I didn't want you to be invisible. I wanted you beside me. Eleanor stared at him, unable to speak. I'm not good at this. Adrian continued. Partnership. Trust. I don't know how to do it without armor. He reached for her hand. But I'm willing to try, if you are. Eleanor's fingers laced through his. I'm willing. They sat there in silence, hands joined, two people who'd been thrown together by circumstance and were choosing, finally, to stay. Awesome. The shift didn't happen all at once. Over the next 2 weeks, Adrian healed. Slowly, painfully, but steadily. Eleanor spent hours at his side, reading to him, arguing with him, making him laugh even when it hurt his ribs. Lillian stayed with them, quiet but safe, slowly coming out of her shell. And London watched. The rumors spread quickly. The Duke of Ashford, attacked in his own home. His wife, refusing to leave his side. The confrontation with Pemberton. Gerald's retreat. At first, the whispers were skeptical, mocking. Another scandal for the frontier duke and his unwanted bride. But then something changed. Lady Beatrice began hosting salons, small gatherings where Eleanor was always invited. Always introduced not as the substitute duchess, but as a woman of substance, a strategist, someone to respect. Captain Hartley spoke openly about Eleanor's courage the night of the attack, how she'd stayed calm, kept Adrian alive until the doctor arrived. And slowly, grudgingly, society began to shift. The invitations started arriving. Not many, but enough. A tea with the Countess of Marlborough, a dinner with the ambassador's wife, small gatherings where Eleanor was treated not as a curiosity, but as a peer. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was acknowledgement. And that was something. The real turning point came 3 weeks after the attack. There was a ball, the Ashford Ball, an annual event Adrian had been hosting for years, usually a business affair, stiff and formal. But this year, Eleanor insisted on changes. "We're not hiding," she told Adrian. "We're making a statement." "What kind of statement?" "That we're not afraid, that we're together, that anyone who tries to destroy us will fail." Adrian studied her, then nodded. "All right, do it your way." Eleanor transformed the ballroom. She hired the best musicians, ordered flowers from 3 different florists, designed the menu herself, and she invited everyone, allies, enemies, neutral parties. Even Pemberton received an invitation. So did Gerald. "You're inviting them?" Adrian asked, incredulous. "I'm daring them to show their faces." Eleanor's smile was sharp. "If they come, they acknowledge we've won. If they don't, they look weak. Either way, we win." The night of the ball, Eleanor dressed in deep emerald silk, the same color she'd worn to the Ashton dinner, but this gown was different, stronger. Madame Colette's masterpiece. Adrian wore black, perfectly tailored, the bandages hidden beneath his waistcoat. They stood at the top of the stairs together as guests arrived. And they came. Not everyone, but more than Eleanor had dared hope. Captain Hartley, grinning. Lady Beatrice, resplendent in silver. The Countess of Marlborough. The ambassador and his wife. Even a few of Pemberton's allies, curiosity overcoming loyalty. Pemberton himself didn't attend. Neither did Gerald. But their absence spoke louder than their presence could have. Eleanor descended the stairs on Adrian's arm, and this time the whispers were different. "She looks magnificent." "Did you hear what she did?" "Saved his life." "Stood up to Pemberton and her own father." "Maybe we underestimated her." The ball itself was a triumph. Eleanor moved through the crowd with confidence, no longer trying to blend in. She spoke her mind, laughed openly, refused to apologize for existing, and Adrian stayed beside her, not hovering, not controlling, just there, an equal, a partner. At one point, Lady Beatrice pulled Eleanor aside. "You've done it," she said quietly. "They're starting to see you." "See what?" "Power." Beatrice smiled. "Real power, not the kind that comes from money or title. The kind that comes from refusing to break." Eleanor looked out at the ballroom, at the people who'd mocked her, ignored her, dismissed her, and now they were watching her with something that looked almost like respect. "It's not over," Eleanor said. "No, but you've won the first battle." Beatrice squeezed her hand, and that's more than most people ever do. Late that night, after the last guests had left, Eleanor and Adrian stood alone in the empty ballroom. Candles still flickered. The orchestra had packed up. Servants moved quietly in the background, cleaning. "We did it," Eleanor said softly. Adrian's arm slipped around her waist. "You did it. We did it together." He pulled her closer, and for the first time since their wedding night, they stood without distance between them. No walls, no armor. "I was wrong," Adrian said quietly. "About you. About this marriage. About everything." Eleanor looked up at him. "What changed?" "I did." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You showed me what strength looks like when it's not wrapped in walls, and I—" He paused, searching for words. "I don't want to be alone anymore." Eleanor's chest tightened. "You're not. You haven't been for a while." Adrian's hand cupped her face. "I know." He kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper. A promise. A beginning. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor was breathless. "What happens now?" she asked. Adrian smiled. "Now we finish what we started, together." Eleanor nodded, leaned into him, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she'd found a place where she belonged. Not because someone gave it to her, because she'd fought for it and won. The kiss lingered between them even after they pulled apart, a promise made in the quiet darkness of an empty ballroom, witnessed only by dying candles and exhausted servants. Eleanor's heart was still racing when Adrian rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. "We should probably go upstairs," he murmured. "Probably." Neither of them moved. Finally, Adrian stepped back, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his still healing wound. Eleanor caught his arm. "Careful." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're stubborn." She guided him toward the stairs. Come on, before you tear something open and I have to explain to the doctor why you're bleeding again. Adrian allowed himself to be led, though the smile tugging at his mouth suggested he wasn't entirely displeased with the arrangement. They climbed the stairs together, moving slowly, and when they reached the landing, Adrian paused. My rooms or yours? Eleanor's pulse jumped. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the question beneath the question. They'd been married for weeks now, shared a name, a home, a battle, but they'd never shared more than that. Yours, she said quietly, if that's all right. Adrian's hand found hers. More than all right. They walked to the West Wing together. Eleanor had never been inside Adrian's rooms. She'd imagined them cold, austere, as unwelcoming as the man she'd thought he was. But when he opened the door, she found something different. The room was large, yes, but lived in. Books stacked on tables, papers scattered across a desk, a leather chair worn soft near the fireplace, windows overlooking the garden. It wasn't warm exactly, but it wasn't the fortress she'd expected. It's not much, Adrian said, suddenly uncertain. It's you. Eleanor turned to face him. That's enough. He crossed to her, hands settling on her waist, and kissed her again, slower this time, deeper. Eleanor's fingers found the buttons of his waistcoat, and Adrian pulled back just long enough to say, The wound, I'll be careful. Eleanor, trust me. His eyes searched hers. Then he nodded. They moved together with a caution born of injury and inexperience, fumbling with buttons and laces, laughing quietly when things didn't go smoothly. It wasn't perfect. Adrian's wound limited his movement, and Eleanor had no idea what she was doing half the time. But it was real, honest. And when they finally came together, skin against skin, Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't survival anymore. This was choosing to be here, choosing him, choosing herself. Afterwards, they lay tangled in sheets, Adrian's arm around her shoulders, Eleanor's head resting on his chest. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear. I didn't think this would happen, Adrian said quietly. What? This, us. He paused. I thought we'd stay in separate wings forever, two strangers sharing a name. Eleanor traced a pattern on his chest. Would that have been easier? Maybe, but it wouldn't have been this. She lifted her head to look at him. Do you regret it? Any of it? Adrian's hand came up to cup her face. The only thing I regret is not seeing you sooner, for who you actually are. Eleanor's throat tightened. And who am I? Someone stronger than I'll ever be. He smiled. And someone I don't deserve. You're wrong about that. Am I? Yes. Eleanor settled back against his chest. We deserve each other. The good and the bad. All of it. Adrian's arms tightened around her. Then we're both lucky. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, no walls between them, for the first time since their wedding night. Morning came with spring light and the sound of birds. Eleanor woke first, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar room. Then she remembered. Adrian's rooms. Adrian's bed. Adrian sleeping beside her, one arm still draped across her waist. She shifted carefully, trying not to wake him, but his eyes opened immediately. Morning, he said, voice rough with sleep. Morning. Eleanor brushed hair out of her face. How's the wound? Manageable. He sat up slowly, testing. Better than yesterday. Good. Eleanor swung her legs out of bed, suddenly aware she was wearing nothing but a borrowed shirt. I should go back to my rooms before the servants. Stay. Adrian caught her hand. Let them talk. They'll gossip. Let them. He pulled her back down beside him. We're married. We're allowed to share a bed. Eleanor laughed. You're the one who insisted on separate wings. I was an idiot. Yes, you were. Adrian grinned, and Eleanor realized she'd never seen him look this relaxed, this unguarded. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Hallowell's voice called through the wood, Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, but there's a visitor. He says it's urgent. Adrian frowned. Who? Captain Hartley. Your Grace. Eleanor and Adrian exchanged glances. Hartley wouldn't interrupt unless it was important. Tell him we'll be down in 10 minutes, Adrian called. They dressed quickly. Eleanor in yesterday's gown, slightly rumpled but passable. Adrian in fresh clothes, moving more easily than he had in days. When they descended to the drawing room, they found Hartley pacing like a caged animal. What's wrong? Adrian asked immediately. Hartley turned. Pemberton's made his move. Eleanor's stomach dropped. What kind of move? He's calling for a parliamentary inquiry into your business dealings. Hartley looked at Adrian. He's claiming you used embezzled funds to secure your title, that your entire fortune is built on fraud. Adrian went very still. He has no proof. He doesn't need proof, just suspicion. Hartley pulled out a folded newspaper, tossed it on the table. It's already in the morning papers. Every gossip rag in London is running the story. Eleanor grabbed the paper, scanned the headline. Duke of Ashford under investigation for financial fraud. Her hands shook with rage. This is retaliation, she said, for us threatening him. Of course it is. Adrian's voice was cold, controlled. He's trying to destroy me publicly because he can't do it privately. Can he actually launch an inquiry? Eleanor asked. If he gets enough votes in Parliament, yes. Adrian began pacing. And if that happens, everything I've built, every contract, every alliance, it all falls apart. Even if I'm cleared, the damage will be done. Then we stop it before it starts, Eleanor said. Hartley raised an eyebrow. How? Eleanor looked at Adrian. We release everything we have on Pemberton, now, today, before he can consolidate support. That'll start a war, Hartley warned. The war already started, Eleanor said. We're just finishing it. Adrian studied her for a long moment, then he nodded. All right, but we do it right. We don't just throw mud. We build a case so airtight he can't defend himself. How long will that take? Hartley asked. A day, maybe 2. Adrian turned to Eleanor. Can you get Lady Beatrice? We'll need her connections to make sure the right people hear this. I'll send for her immediately. Adrian looked at Hartley. I need you to gather anyone you trust. Military contacts, business partners, anyone who owes me a favor. We're going to need votes when this hits Parliament. Hartley nodded. I'm on it. Eleanor moved toward the door, then paused. Adrian? He looked up. We're going to win this. His mouth curved. I know. The next 36 hours were a blur of strategy and preparation. Eleanor worked with Lady Beatrice, compiling every piece of evidence they had on Pemberton, ledgers showing his gambling debts, letters proving his embezzlement, testimony from the mistress he'd paid off to stay silent. They organized it into a dossier so damning even Pemberton's closest allies would have to abandon him. Adrian met with his solicitors, building a countercase that proved every penny of his fortune was legitimate. He pulled records from his years out west, contracts signed and honored, investments made and returned. It was exhaustive, meticulous work. But it was solid. Hartley gathered allies, military men who respected Adrian's leadership, businessmen who owed him favors, even a few members of Parliament who'd grown tired of Pemberton's corruption. On the second night, Eleanor found Adrian in his study, surrounded by papers, eyes bloodshot. You need to sleep, she said. I need to finish this. Eleanor crossed to him, gently removed the pen from his hand. You can't finish it if you collapse. Come to bed. Adrian looked up at her, exhaustion written across his face. What if it's not enough? What if we miss something? Then we'll deal with it together. Eleanor pulled him to his feet. But right now, you need rest. He didn't argue. Just let her lead him upstairs, where they collapsed into bed, still half-dressed, and slept tangled together until dawn. The parliamentary session was scheduled for Thursday morning. Eleanor dressed in charcoal gray, severe, powerful, a deliberate choice. She braided her hair tight, wore no jewelry except her wedding ring. Adrian wore black, perfectly tailored, every inch the Duke. They arrived at Westminster together, walking through a gauntlet of reporters and onlookers. Flashbulbs popped. Questions were shouted. Your Grace, is it true you embezzled funds? Are you stepping down? What do you say to the allegations? Adrian ignored them all, Eleanor's hand firm on his arm. Inside, the chamber was already packed. Members of Parliament clustered in groups, whispering, watching. Pemberton stood near the front, surrounded by his allies, looking smug. Eleanor and Adrian took their seats in the gallery reserved for peers and their families. Hartley was already there, along with Lady Beatrice and several others who'd pledged support. The session began with procedural matters, bills, votes, endless bureaucracy. Then the speaker stood. We now address the motion brought forth by Lord Pemberton regarding an inquiry into the financial dealings of Adrian Blackthorne, Duke of Ashford. Pemberton rose, all false gravitas and calculated outrage. Mr. Speaker, I bring this motion with a heavy heart, but we cannot allow our institutions to be corrupted by men who built their fortunes on deceit and fraud. He launched into a speech, long, theatrical, full of implications and innuendo, but light on actual facts. Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. When Pemberton finally sat down, the chamber buzzed with whispers. The speaker looked around. Does anyone wish to speak in defense of the Duke of Ashford? For a moment, no one moved. Then Captain Hartley stood. I do, Mr. Speaker. The chamber went quiet. Hartley walked to the center of the floor, military bearing evident in every step. I served with Adrian Blackthorne in the Western Territories. I watched him rebuild collapsed infrastructure, honor contracts when easier men would have fled, and treat his workers with more respect than most lords show their peers. He paused. Lord Pemberton speaks of fraud and deceit, but I've seen the receipts, the contracts, the legitimate business dealings that built the Duke's fortune, and I'm prepared to present them now. One of Adrian's solicitors stood carrying a heavy case of documents. He began distributing copies to the chamber. Pemberton's face went red. This is irregular. No more irregular than launching an inquiry based on gossip, Hartley shot back. The speaker intervened. Please, gentlemen, let us maintain order. Eleanor watched as Parliament members began reading through the documents, saw their expressions shift from skepticism to surprise to grudging respect. But Pemberton wasn't done. Even if his current fortune is legitimate, questions remain about how he acquired his initial capital, about deals made in territories with no oversight. You want to talk about questionable deals? Eleanor turned. Lady Beatrice had stood, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. Lady Beatrice, the speaker said, startled, this is most— I have evidence, Beatrice said calmly, that Lord Pemberton has embezzled over £100,000 from his own investment partners over the past 5 years. The chamber erupted. Pemberton went white. That's a lie. Is it? Beatrice pulled out a folder, began distributing papers. These are ledgers from your own accounts, signed by you, showing transfers to private accounts under false names. Pandemonium. Members shouting. Pemberton's allies backing away. The speaker banging his gavel, demanding order. Eleanor felt Adrian's hand find hers under the table. She squeezed back, heart pounding. Pemberton tried to recover. Those documents are forgeries, bro. Forgeries? Another voice. This time, a thin man in the back Eleanor didn't recognize. I'm one of the investment partners Lord Pemberton defrauded, and I have matching records that prove every word Lady Beatrice says is true. More voices joined in. One by one, people Pemberton had wronged stood up, testified, presented evidence. Eleanor watched Pemberton's face cycle through rage, panic, desperation. He'd expected to destroy Adrian. Instead, he'd walked into his own execution. The speaker finally restored order. In light of these revelations, I propose we table the motion regarding the Duke of Ashford and open a formal inquiry into Lord Pemberton's financial dealings instead. A vote was called. It passed overwhelmingly. Pemberton stood there ashen as the chamber turned against him. He looked at Adrian once, hatred burning in his eyes, then turned and walked out. Eleanor exhaled slowly. It was over. They'd won. Outside Westminster, reporters swarmed them, but this time the questions were different. Your Grace, how does it feel to be vindicated? Will you be pressing charges against Lord Pemberton? What's next for you and the Duchess? Adrian held up a hand. I have no statement at this time, except to say that truth prevails, and I'm grateful to those who stood with me. He guided Eleanor toward their carriage. Once inside, doors closed, they finally allowed themselves to breathe. "We did it," Eleanor whispered. Adrian pulled her close. "You did it. This was your strategy. It was our fight." "Yes." He kissed her forehead. "It was." The carriage began moving, carrying them away from Westminster, away from the battle, toward home. News of Pemberton's fall spread through London like wildfire. Within a week, he'd resigned from Parliament. His business interests collapsed. His allies abandoned him. He was ruined, socially, financially, completely. Eleanor felt no satisfaction in it, just relief that he could no longer hurt them. As for Gerald, he'd gone quiet after Pemberton's exposure. Eleanor suspected he was scrambling to cover his own tracks, terrified he'd be next. She considered releasing what they had on him, but ultimately decided against it. He'd lost his leverage, lost his daughters. That was punishment enough. Lillian bloomed in the weeks that followed. With Pemberton gone and Gerald neutered, she began to relax, smile, explore London with a wonder Eleanor had never seen before. She even started taking painting lessons, something she'd always wanted but never been allowed. One afternoon, Eleanor found her in the garden, easel set up, working on a landscape. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said. Lillian jumped, then laughed. "You startled me." "Sorry." Eleanor sat on the bench beside her. "Are you happy here?" Lillian set down her brush. "Happier than I've ever been. Thank you for saving me." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." Lillian's eyes were serious. "You risked everything for me. Your marriage, your safety. I'll never forget that." Eleanor pulled her sister into a hug. "Your family. I'd do it again." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching spring paint the garden in shades of green and gold. A month after the parliamentary session, Adrian received an invitation. The Prince of Wales was hosting a dinner, a small, exclusive affair, and the Duke and Duchess of Ashford were requested to attend. "This is significant," Adrian said, staring at the heavy cream invitation. "The prince doesn't invite people lightly." "What does it mean?" Eleanor asked. "It means we're not outsiders anymore. We've been accepted." He looked up at her. "By the highest levels of society." Eleanor took the invitation, read it herself. Part of her wanted to refuse, to tell them all they could keep their acceptance. She didn't need it. But another part, the part that had fought so hard to be seen, to be heard, wanted to go, wanted to walk into that room as an equal and show them she'd earned her place. "We should go," she said finally. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "Yes, not because I need their approval, but because I want them to see what happens when they underestimate someone." Adrian smiled. "Then we'll go." The dinner was held at a private estate in Surrey, all candlelight and crystal. Eleanor wore emerald silk again, her color now, her armor. Adrian wore formal evening dress, moving with the confidence of a man who'd faced down his enemies and won. When they were announced, heads turned, conversations paused. The Prince of Wales himself approached, a tall, broad man with an easy smile. "Your Grace, Duchess, welcome." He shook Adrian's hand, then turned to Eleanor. "I've heard quite a bit about you, Your Grace." "All terrible things, I'm sure," Eleanor said lightly. The prince laughed. "On the contrary, Lady Beatrice speaks very highly of you, as does Captain Hartley." He leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I'm glad Pemberton's gone. He was a bore and a cheat." Eleanor blinked. She hadn't expected such blunt honesty from royalty. "Thank you, Your Highness." "No need for thanks. You did the work." The prince gestured toward the dining room. "Come, sit with me. I want to hear all about how you managed to outmaneuver half of Parliament." The dinner was surprisingly pleasant. The prince was charming, intelligent, genuinely interested in their story. Other guests, lords and ladies Eleanor had once thought unreachable, treated her as an equal, asked her opinion, listened when she spoke. It was surreal. At one point, Adrian leaned over and whispered, "You're enjoying this." Eleanor glanced at him. Is that surprising? No, just different from the woman who walked into the Ashton dinner terrified. I'm not that woman anymore. No. Adrian's hand found hers under the table. You're not. They left the dinner late, the carriage ride home quiet and comfortable. Eleanor leaned against Adrian's shoulder, watching the countryside roll past in moonlight. What are you thinking? Adrian asked. That a few months ago I was the unwanted sister, the backup plan. And now you're a duchess who brought down one of the most powerful men in Parliament. Eleanor laughed softly. When you put it that way, it sounds impressive. It is impressive. Adrian tilted her chin up to look at him. You're impressive. Eleanor's chest tightened. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to. They kissed, gentle and sweet, the kind of kiss that promised more later. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor said, What happens now? What do you want to happen? Eleanor thought about it, about Lillian safe and happy, about enemies defeated and allies gained, about a marriage that had started as a transaction and become something real. I want to keep building, she said finally. Not just survive, actually build something, together. Adrian smiled. Then that's what we'll do. Spring turned to summer and the Ashford household settled into a new rhythm. Eleanor took over managing the estate's charitable endeavors, working with Lady Beatrice to fund schools and hospitals. Adrian expanded his business interests, but with Eleanor's input now, making decisions together. Lillian stayed with them through the summer, eventually finding her own feet. She met a young artist, kind, talented, nothing like the men their father would have chosen, and fell cautiously, beautifully in love. Eleanor gave them her blessing, and when they married the following spring, it was a joyful affair filled with laughter and paint-stained hands. Gerald died 2 years later, quietly, alone, his fortune depleted and his name forgotten. Eleanor didn't attend the funeral, neither did Lillian. They'd mourned the father they'd wanted long ago. The man who died was a stranger. As for Pemberton, he fled to the continent, chased by debts and scandal. Eleanor heard rumors occasionally, living in poverty in Paris or maybe Rome, but she didn't care enough to verify them. He was gone. That was enough. The Ashford townhouse became a gathering place for the people who didn't quite fit London's mold. Artists, scholars, reformers. Eleanor hosted salons where ideas were debated and challenged. Adrian funded ventures that others thought too risky. Together, they built something new. And somewhere along the way, Eleanor stopped counting the victories and started simply living. On a cool autumn evening 2 years after that first terrible night, Eleanor stood in the garden watching the sunset. She felt Adrian's presence before she heard him. He came up behind her, arms sliding around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. What are you thinking about? He asked. Eleanor leaned into him. How different everything is now. Better? So much better. She turned in his arms to face him. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me instead of walking away? Adrian's hands came up to frame her face. Not for a single second. Even though I made everything complicated? Especially because you made everything complicated. He smiled. You taught me that walls don't protect you. They just make you lonely. Eleanor's throat tightened. And you taught me that I'm worth fighting for. You always were. You just needed someone to see it. They stood there in the fading light, two people who'd been thrown together by deception and chose to stay together by design. Eleanor thought about the girl she'd been, overlooked, dismissed, sold like property, and the woman she'd become, a duchess, yes, but more than that, a fighter, a partner, someone who'd rewritten the rules instead of breaking under them. I love you, she said. Simple. True. Adrian's smile was soft, genuine. I love you too. They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. And when they finally pulled apart, walking back toward the house hand in hand, Eleanor realized something. This wasn't just survival anymore. It wasn't even victory. It was home. The kind of home she'd built herself, brick by brick, battle by battle. with a man who'd started as a stranger and become her equal. Inside the house, lights glowed warm. Lillian was there, visiting with her husband. Mrs. Hallowell was preparing dinner. Mary was probably setting the table, humming to herself. Life. Messy, complicated, beautiful life. Eleanor squeezed Adrian's hand. He squeezed back, and together they walked inside. Not as prisoners anymore, not as survivors, but as people who'd faced the worst and chose every single day to build something better. The door closed behind them, shutting out the cold autumn air, and in the warmth of home, real home, earned home, Eleanor finally understood what she'd been fighting for all along. Not acceptance, not revenge, just this: a life worth living, a love worth keeping, and a future they would write themselves, together.